As I mentioned in the keynote just before, there's a whole range of different policies, but because of the current times, because coming out of COVID and the supply chain challenges and the Russia-Ukraine conflict, governments are really strapped. We wanted to really profile in this one panel some of the policies that we think are able to be implemented by government at really no or low cost. So we'll talk about other things that these folks have on their mind, but we want to start with talking about a few policies. So the three that I wanted to really profile were the liability protection, which we talked about, so we'll talk about that in a few countries. The policies that clarify food safety for donations doesn't cost that much. It's really helping make things simpler and remove some of the confusion. And then we'll talk about date labeling and the experience from Costa Rica. So I'm going to tell you the 4 wonderful food bank partners we have up here, and then I'm going to ask them each a few questions. So next to me, we have Daniela Osores, who's General Manager of Bancos de Alimentos, Peru. Next to her is Francia Linares Orozco. Is my Spanish okay? Executive Director, Banco de Alimentos de Costa Rica. And then next is Ravit Dinmez Yehezkel, who's Senior Vice President of Legal and Government Relations at Leket, Israel. And then lastly, Vishal Kumar, who's CEO of Feeding India by Zomato. So let's get started talking about some policies. Ravit, I'm going to ask you to kick us off, talking about how the experience that Leket had successfully lobbying for a policy change in Israel to create liability protection. So I'm hoping for each of you, you can start by sharing just briefly who you are, a little bit about your role in your food bank, and then maybe you can tell us about the liability protection law in Israel.
Okay. So I'm doing all the boring legal stuff, like it. But what really gives me passion in my work is the government relations part. It's very complicated to do in Israel, especially in this time of lack of stability. Forgive me for my voice. It's because I flew for Turkey 15 hours. So I've lost my voice. I want to tell you today that Gidi mentioned this morning, our CEO, that we passed in 2018 the food protection law. And this law increased rates to food donations, but not as much as we expected to do. I think it's because it's not giving full protection to the donors. And I think that in Israel, we don't have enough, I forgot the word that I want to say, sorry, incentives, sorry. I'm very excited to be here, as you all can imagine. So now in Israel, we are working to improve this all liability, and we're working on a national plan that will give a holistic vision of incentives. Economic one are the most efficient, to our opinion. So I want to speak about 4 bills that we are submitting now with the current government. It's not easy to do, as you all know, but we're trying. We submitted 4 bills. One of them suggests that the government will give incentives to agricultural donors and help them. We need to understand that their surplus is a win for us, but they are losing income. So we need to support them. So this is one bill that we submitted. The other one suggests that government companies will be, they will have to donate their surplus. The logic behind this bill is that the fund that they give is from the government. So they need to give back what they're receiving. The third one is to increase tax incentives for surplus donations. And the last one is a very ambitious one. He takes all of them together and combine to one bill and trying to suggest the plan that I was speaking about in one suggestion that we're hoping to succeed with.
You have a lot of work, but it's very exciting and I think builds a lot, like showing how passing one law, you kind of start to build the coalition and the momentum and hopefully it can carry it forward. I want to come to Daniela next to share. I know actually we talked about a few things in Peru, which we can come back to, but maybe to start, if you want to just kind of introduce yourself a little bit and then talk about the liability protection law in Peru, which you know, what you've thought about it.
Perfect. Hola, mi nombre es Daniela Osores. Estoy a cargo de la gerencia del Banco Alimentos Perú.
The manager of Banco Alimentos Peru. We started operations in 2014. Now, since 2004, there has been a general law of donations whereby companies benefit from taxes, but what happened is that companies were still allowed to waste food, and to waste food, and this in contrast with Mexico, there's a cost. They have to pay for the use of the landfill. They have to pay for the transportation of solid residue, solid waste, and also once they destroy food, actually companies would benefit in their taxes from the destruction of food. What does that mean? Well, food donation was totally disincentivized because for the companies it was more expensive to donate food than to destroy it. Destroying it, even though it implied a cost, was something that they could obtain. They were shielded fiscally in a way. They could get some refunds. Now, when the donation law was promoted specifically by food banks, specifically for food donations, the law tells the companies that if they destroy food, it's one thing, but also if you donate food, you're going to have an incentive. So that equalized destruction with donation. The benefits were the same. Of course, this did not result in more donors because of the fear that the companies had about where their food would end up. And also it's important to mention that within that food donation law, liability was not mentioned. That is, the company did not have liability, civil or criminal liabilities in case of something happening with the food. And this actually plays against us because companies have that fear when they donate. Happily, it's not all the companies, but we have had specific cases where this protection that is lacking for the companies prevent food donation. On the other hand, some years later, 2 years later, what companies were told is, well, you can donate food, you can recover up to 10% of the income. However, if it's a company that does not have an income but sells, you can deduct up to 5%, I think she said, on the donation. So there are companies that were selling but not generating an income. Now, after 2019, there was an amendment to the law. It expanded the law. Now the law says that I'm going to benefit you now with your income, but now I'm going to forbid food destruction. That was in 2019. It was going to be penalized. Now it's 2023. There's still no regulations, so the law hasn't been implemented. However, when different organizations started to gather to develop the policies under this law, not many agreements were reached. So we were wondering, what is better to have a tax incentive or to have penalties for the destruction of food. So that's still not clear. However, beyond the existence of a food donation law that benefits companies that donate, including within that benefit the costs associated to transportation, that's a benefit that companies don't get when they destroy food. But however, many times or very often, companies have internal policies. So sometimes because of their internal policies, well, if it's under 3 months, I cannot donate it to you, or I have already gone beyond the budget I have for food donations. So those are the things that we need to work on. It's not only public policies, but we have to work with the companies. As a food bank, we have been promoting with our companies, we're donor companies, we have been telling them about all the benefits they have access to. Very often, companies are unaware of the tax benefits that they can obtain. And since they're not still 100% defined, what area of donation we have, whether it's protection from liability, marketing, supply chain. So we're trying to reach the area that works specifically on those topics, and we want to talk directly to the company's accountants, the company's legal department, to explain to them how that works. They don't know about food donation. So this has supported donations, but we need to continue working from our position as a food bank to incentivize more than we penalize. Thank you.
I think it also echoes what we heard from Ravit, which is just, this is a long process. Sometimes you start with something and then you figure out how it goes. So it's the fun part, but also the challenge of thinking about the way that, you know, you can work with government. And also I think your point as well, just that a low-cost policy for any of these areas is often to work with government to actually help raise awareness and explain. So if there are tax incentives, we heard from so many countries, even that they have an incentive, but companies, there's not good guidance, so no one is taking advantage of them, or there maybe is protection. So that's another thing that is a very low cost if you can get the attention of the right ministries to put out guidance and make it easier for companies. So thank you. Okay, Vishal, we'll go down over to your end. I would love if you can also tell us a little about your work, and then we heard, I mentioned earlier, the food safety, the surplus food regulations in India. So if you can talk about sort of what's good and what's working about them, what you think can make them even stronger.
Sure. So Feeding India is a large-scale nonprofit, and our primary goal is to work on child and maternal malnutrition. And we do it in 2 ways. A significant part of our programs also involves serving freshly cooked foods, and there is a significant, there's a team that works on the food recovery programs. On the food recovery side, before the pandemic, we used to primarily work with restaurants. We have India's largest food delivery app called Zomato is an institutional partner with Feeding India that gives us access to almost more than 200,000 restaurants across the country. So collecting food from there, redistributing it to the nearby community is super hyper local model that we were working on. Apart from this, another program that we had, we used to call it the Happy Fridge, community-led driven program where we had installed fridges at more than 200 locations across 40 plus cities, and the community would provide the surplus food to be consumed by the people in the vicinity. Post-pandemic, we have been primarily working with the food companies, and also there's a new trend in India has come up in terms of quick commerce, 10-minute delivery, which means that now there are like dark stores with perishable foods in every like 2-kilometer area. This has literally transformed the online delivery market. But what is happening is these places now have to stock the food, and they have, you can just say like small area getting large number of supermarkets that you are seeing here. So we have partnered with them, and we are fruits and vegetables and all the food items that we can redistribute to our NGO partners. We have close to 800 plus NGO partners right now. We are working with them So that's the, I would say, the range of programs we run. With regard to the policy development, as all our panelists have said and I've been hearing since morning, I think the only thing I can say that the things that divide us, bureaucracy and politics, is one thing that totally unite us. I think it's a very slow process in India also. In 2019, we got the FSSAI policy in place. It sort of provides, I would say still it's early days, it provides the legitimacy to the entire surplus food donation activity, provides your standard operating procedures, provides you the legal framework to work on. But I think there are like a policy 2.0 or policy 3.0 is needed, where all the things that we have talked around liability protection, around tax benefits, those things still need to be figured out. And we are working with the government, GFN and all the partners that we have are providing us the right guidance, and hopefully by the time next time we meet here, all the boxes on your slide should be checked out.
All right, so Francia, let me bring you into the conversation. So if you can similarly share a little bit more about your work, and then highlight a little bit the work that you are doing, like with government during COVID, looking at date labeling and how that's worked, or what you think needs to happen next. And remembering that, as I mentioned earlier, often, for the most part, date labels on most foods are really about quality and freshness, but a lot of food is wasted because there's confusion.
Gracias. En realidad la situación de Costa Rica es muy similar a la que han mencionado en algunas
partes. Similar to what's been told about many other places, mainly Peru. And part of the value that we saw in the work done by the clinic is in the visibility of different areas that are interrelated. Now, instead of being a case of total success, we had an opportunity in Costa Rica, and that is that a document was defined by the Ministry of Health, or drafted a Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Agriculture, and other actors, without the participation of the food bank. And this generated a document that at first glance it seemed to be pretty thorough, pretty complete, related to the issue of labeling. And then in saying that after that freshness date or expiration date, food might be consumed. Now, this didn't move forward when COVID started, and it's good that it didn't, because when we realized the existence of that document without the participation, created without participation of the food bank, we identified a number of errors that the Atlas identified, actually. And I think that part of the significant value of this work is that deep research in different areas which are connected to, the legal framework. In some countries, at least in Central America, the legal framework is important because it creates that fear that companies will get harmed and not benefit. Also in Costa Rica, we are part of a system, a Central American organization, CIECA, the Central American Interaction System. It's something that we didn't consider this as a principal or significant actor in this system, but the Atlas also mentions it. So we have, in summary, gone through several stages, and right now we are reviewing the issue of labeling so that we can not only clarify concepts, because the concept of 2 dates is pretty confusing, even for the companies themselves, not just because of cost. It's not cost the reason they don't use the 2 label system, but it's also that they don't know it. So I just wanted to mention that, and I wanted to thank you, because the Atlas has clarified a number of concepts and steps that countries can follow to achieve that legislation that's needed.
Glad to Here, we didn't pay Francia to say that. So I want to ask a couple questions, and I'm going to put them out, and maybe whoever wants to answer. But I actually wanted to start with the question we got in the end of the keynote, which was really about what other partnerships you've worked with, either to pass successful policies or as you're thinking about, the next changes. Who are the other allies that you think are important? And I don't know, Francia, if I can ask you first, because I know from the work that we did with you that you're working with like a whole big, network. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit about who are those other partners, and then I'll see who else wants to jump in.
Well, creo que uno de los aliados más importantes ha sido la red contra la pérdida y desperdicio de alimentos. Esta red reúne, digamos, a un grupo, digamos, multicultural y, digamos, de conocimiento, incluyendo la academia, que podría ser, digamos, que puede tener mayor relevancia en esta participación. Por otro lado, creo que la parte de las empresas privadas, que además son aliados inclusive de GFN, tiene un papel preponderante en esta situación.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to take a stab at that? Daniela?
De hecho, en Perú, o sea, el hecho de poder tener el Atlas nos ha servido no solo para poder
work, not only to be able to make the different laws visible and to understand where every law can go. Because even in the sector, we're talking about food donation, it also helps to avoid food waste and loss. And the interesting thing about it is that, and in fact, we identify this using the Atlas, is on the one hand, we have a food donation law, and then we have other laws that that stop or try to stop food waste. However, there's nothing that connects one thing to the other. This food prevention law doesn't tell you that you can donate the same food. So we find different laws, different pieces of legislation that talk about similar issues, but however, they do not make the connection between food waste and loss with the donation. So I think that is a very important step that we know through the appropriate regulation. And, by using the food that has lost commercial value. In the case of Peru, we could feed almost 70% of the population that is suffering from hunger right now. So making this connection is very important. That is where the Atlas was really helpful. That helped us a lot, not only because it allowed us to know the laws that we have in the books, but also to have a more broad vision of what we can do. Of course, there are a number of regulations. We have municipalities passing regulations, different politicians that try to obtain new votes by creating new laws or writing new laws. But however, we believe that if you have legislation that has very clear goals, which is what we learned from the Atlas. We have been reading it for 3 years, 4 years that we've had the Atlas. So we can really work together a lot more in coordination. So the companies that have to get rid of food with the companies that distribute food, and especially with the agro sector, which is where most of the food is destroyed.
I think it's something for everyone to remember as well, that we've seen now in a couple of countries, and this is true in the US, where state policies are like a good opportunity to test something out. So even the Bill Emerson Act, which was the US liability protection, was based on state laws, first in California and Washington, and then they saw, okay, nobody is getting hurt from this law, and raised it up. So I think it's it can be challenging, but also a good opportunity for everyone to remember. I don't know, Ravit or Vishal, if you want to answer this question, or you want me to go to the next one.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ravit first.
Didn't pay me to see this as well, but we are waiting for the report to publish in Israel, because I'm personally counting money to help us to build a more specific national plan for the government. So this is what I want to say.
Yes, just one small point around, I think public mobilization has really helped us. We had a last set of like 25,000 plus odd volunteers. With the partnership with Zomato, we can reach to almost millions of people through their apps. So the moment we get the conversation going around this, it becomes a center stage for policymakers in the country. And I think the only experience that I can say about policy making is we have to keep knocking at the door, unlike business meetings where we go in with an agenda, we look for outcome right after the meeting. With policy, probably 10 knocks, nothing is happening, and that 11th meeting is something where you will get lucky. Like my friend in Israel said, he met somebody in prison who helped us build the policy. In India, in 2017, the Honorable Prime Minister just spoke about food wastage, and from there on, it has become a conversation which every bureaucrat has started taking seriously and has decided to engage with us. So, yeah.
So one thing I want to ask, which again, was not the question I prepared, but you're giving me all these new questions. So one thing I wanted to ask was just, given what we've been talking about like the kind of crises that our government are coming out of, how has that changed maybe the talking points that you're using for trying to, achieve the policies that you're working on now in any way? Is it, change in some way the way that you're approaching this, or the main data that you're putting in front of them? And I didn't prepare you, so if no one has an answer, it's okay.
I think for me, again, the only thing I try is not to be too critical of them. Generally, when somebody from outside goes to the government, and a lot of time I have seen that people walking into and then telling, oh, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, and that never flies off the handle, at least not in India. So a simple example around, I would rather start the conversation with how much food is getting wasted and how much people it can feed, rather than saying, oh, 800 million people are not having access to food and nothing, and what is this 5th largest economy, all of that. So which data you point to becomes super critical for us at this point of time. Yeah, probably that's it.
That in Israel we're trying to show them what is it for me, how the national point of view can earn from supporting surplus and increasing the rescuing of them. So
yo pienso que
right now, especially in Central America, in Costa Rica, what we have seen is with the change of government, the regulations, the policies in general changed. And I think that it would be fundamental to really count with this information as a basis to try to push for this legislation, the legislation that hasn't changed with the change of government. In our case in Peru, it's the same thing. Unfortunately, we had 6 presidents in the last 7 years, and we start over every time. So to have an atlas, to have this information, this allows us to not start from scratch every time, not from zero. So every person that is involved in order to formulate these regulations, perhaps the next month they may not be there. So it's really hard to keep up because there are other incentives, unfortunately. So that is a very important challenge that we have in Peru. As I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, in 2019, they passed this new law, but by 2023, we still don't have the regulations. And that's because we've had so many people on the job during these last few years, and there has been no continuity. And that is a very, very huge challenge that we have.
It's true everywhere, right? Like you make these relationships, you educate people, and you have to start over. So I think you need to take a deep breath and go through the talking points again. One thing each of you mentioned was, I asked you about one policy, and I think very quickly you sort of said, here's the policy and here's why it wasn't as successful as we imagined. So maybe you can each answer, on the particular policy, so I think for, Ravit and Daniela, maybe talking about liability, or, you had mentioned a few others, and Francia on date labeling, and Vishal on the food safety regulations, the surplus food regulation. If you were doing it again in a new country, what do you wish you would have known? What have you learned if someone was looking at like these particular policy changes? And I don't know who wants to go first on that one.
Desde Perú, yo creo que lo más
First, from Peru, I think the most important thing has been to be able to take advantage of the incentives that the companies had when they received the tax exemptions. For them, it was more expensive to donate rather than destroy the food. So I think that when you get the donation of food as a benefit, and it's better that than destroying the food. If that's not the case, it's really impossible to create awareness or to incentivize companies to donate food. If we could start from scratch or from zero, we should have clear incentives for businesses. We should know what the limits are, and especially, and this is a challenge that I mentioned already, we should be able to speak out and tell them what the different regulations and laws are, because you have different ministries, you have different laws. However, if you could explain what they are, and if they could be linked to each other so that you could protect the food. So another important thing that we see in Peru is that to be able to make it known, you have this legislation, it passes, but you do not invite the private sector to learn about the new law. So what's the point of having this law if when we go talk to the companies, they're not aware that it exists? So to be able to promote, to create the spaces, or to advertise what the laws are, because for us as food banks, we are just little bitty ants that are trying to work company by company, business by business, but we want to make sure the state, the government lets us know what the initiatives are, what's going on, to make our path to this less difficult.
I think it's a really good point on that too. Like, if legislation is being passed, it could say in there which ministry has to do what and in what timeline, so that they have to put something out and it's not just waiting forever to have education. It's a really good point. Who else wants to share? Ravit? Yeah, go ahead.
If I'm starting all over again today, I think that I'm investing more resource in lobbying, in someone that will help us to promote our ideas. In Israel, we are suffering from lack of stability. We had 3 prime ministers only in the last 2 years. And each time we're thinking that we're achieving something, we're going for elections and we need to start all over again. It's been mentioned here from a lot of people, but if you have someone that related to the basic of the politics, it can work with each side of the political map, and I would have invested with someone like this, like a political star that can go with us all way long.
Your point, one thing that I think is really important you said is about thinking about all the sides of the political map, and I think it's true, especially in cases where you're seeing a lot of change in government, making the case in ways that can appeal to all the different sides, whether they're more interested in the business case, like showing data about how this increases jobs even in our sector. Like we've seen some of the data we use in the US has been around job creation just by having more food be donated and things like that. And then on the other side, it's a public health. And so, kind of remembering the whole spectrum, even no matter who's in power at that moment. It's a really good one. Francia, do you want to go next?
Si pudiéramos empezar de cero, creo que...
If I could start from zero, I think, to clarify the concepts in our countries, I think that would be very important. That's on one side. On the other side, I think there is this inner relation between responsibility the actions that private companies take. Some private companies, for instance, because they don't have enough clarity of what the legislation is, so they decide not to act altogether. So I think that is important to the Atlas, is there and helps us with that. It gives us the information. If we had to start from zero, I would take that information first.
If I had to redo this, I would go more top-down, like the number of ministries which are involved. If we, like FSSAI is one ministry, but Ministry of Agriculture, Food Processing, if we could have just gone top-down, probably bringing all of these players on one table and then drafting out the legislation and sort of very clearly stating what it is there to, what we are trying to solve here, I think we would have saved some time. We will eventually get there, but probably it will just, we'll be a couple of years older. That's it.
Oh, we only have a little time, so I think maybe I'm going to ask one more question, maybe if you can answer quickly, which would be your wish. So I would say if we are coming back 1 year from now, except I know that policy takes more than 1 year, we can have gray hair waiting for policy change. So let's say in 2 years or 3 years from now, related to what we talked about in terms of the policies you're working on, what is your one wish that you hope will be achieved by 2 years from now if you have your way? And I don't know if, Vishal, do you want to start from your end?
For us, it's liability protection, because otherwise, culturally, I think in India, people like food donation. There is a real play out there. If we can figure out the legislation around that, things should be sorted.
Wow. National plan for food security and support by the government for rescuing surplus, not only food security, but for rescuing surplus. Sorry.
Thank you, Ravit. I feel bad. We won't make you talk anymore after this. Francia?
Creo que contar con...
I think we would have to have a law that, let's say, that changes the food labeling problem. I think that is one of the huge challenges that we have, and I would incorporate the liability protection. In our case, again, liability protection and give tax incentives to the companies, and especially to take this to the agro sector.
Thank you so much. Will you join me in thanking this amazing, amazing panel? And I'm going to welcome up the next panel talking more about policy. And again, I hope everyone will join us at the reception. I'm not going to be up here again to ask you, but hopefully we'd love to hear your input and questions. And as I said, ideas for where to take this in the future, because we're really figuring out all the next steps and we want it to be as useful as possible. And I got these free commercials from everyone up here, so thank you all as well.